Imagine you're standing on the deck of a massive ship. It's the middle of the night. The water's black, the wind is howling, and the waves are about 20 feet high. The ship is thrashing. It's tilting left, then violently right. You're sliding across the deck, trying to grab a railing, anything to stop from going over. Now, in that moment, does it matter how beautifully painted the ship is? Does it matter if the engines are brand new? No. The only thing keeping that ship from being torn apart by the ocean is a chain going down into the dark, tethered to something heavy and immovable on the sea floor.
Welcome back to the show. Today, we are stripping everything back. We aren't talking about productivity hacks or how to optimize your morning routine. We are talking about that chain. Specifically, we're looking at week 1 of a framework called The Stabilizer by Agim Mamuti. It's titled The Anchor Point, and it claims that the reason most of us feel stressed isn't because we're busy. It's because we're drifting.
And that distinction is critical, Noah. We tend to think of stress as a volume problem. Too many emails, too many meetings. But Mamuti's premise here, which aligns with a lot of deep psychological research, is that stress is actually an alignment problem. You can work 18 hours a day on something you deeply value and feel exhausted, sure, but not necessarily unstable. But if you spend 2 hours doing something that violates your core sense of self, that is where the wobble comes from.
I want to dig into that because, frankly, it sounds a little bit like the poster on the wall of a dentist's office. Live your values. It's a nice sentiment, Eloise, but when I have a mortgage and a deadline, my value is paying the bills. Is there actually any science to this idea that values act as a physiological stabilizer? Or is it just a nice metaphor?
It is a nice metaphor, but it's backed by hard biology. There's a fascinating body of research known as value affirmation theory. One of the landmark studies came out of UCLA and the University of Pittsburgh, led by researchers like David Creswell. They actually measured cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, in people facing high-pressure situations. They found that participants who spent just a few minutes writing about their core values before a stressor had significantly lower cortisol responses than those who didn't.
So simply acknowledging what matters to you physically lowers the panic hormone?
Exactly. It buffers the neuroendocrine response. When you know who you are, when you have that anchor point, to use Mamuti's term, your brain perceives the threat as manageable. You aren't fighting the waves, you're tethered. Without that anchor, every wave feels like an existential threat because you have no center of gravity. That is what Agim Mamuti, and remember, he notes the G is pronounced like good, is getting at with this week 1 protocol.
Okay, so let's look at the protocol. He calls this week the anchor point, and the goal is to identify your core non-negotiable values. But here's where I get stuck, and I think a lot of listeners do too. If you ask me what my values are, I'm going to say integrity, kindness, hard work, maybe, health. I can list 10 good words. How is that helpful?
This is the trap, and Mamuti addresses this explicitly in the text. There's a massive difference between what we call aspirational values and operational values. Aspirational values are the words you think you should care about. They're the words you'd put on your resume or your dating profile. Operational values, or what the text calls the anchor points, are the values that actually govern your behavior when you are backed into a corner.
Give me an example of the difference.
Okay, let's say you claim to value connection. That's your aspirational value. But for the last 3 weeks, every time a friend called, you sent them to voicemail because you were working late to impress your boss. Your operational value in that moment is actually achievement or perhaps security. The stress you feel, that wobble, isn't because you worked late. It's because you are claiming to be a ship anchored in connection, but you are actually docked in achievement. You're lying to yourself about where you are.
That hits home. It's that feeling of friction. I think psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, right? Where your actions and your beliefs are fighting a war in your head.
Precisely, and that war is exhausting. It burns more glucose in the brain than the actual work does. The stabilizer exercise for this week is designed to end that war. Mamuti suggests a top 3 audit. You don't get 10 words, you get 3. And the criteria is, if you lost this, you would no longer feel like yourself.
The list he provides is interesting. It's not just the standard moral virtues. He lists integrity, curiosity, calm, courage, connection, autonomy, service, vitality, wisdom, discipline. I find calm to be a fascinating inclusion as a core value. We usually think of calm as a mood, not a value.
Calm as a value is revolutionary. If you value calm, it means you prioritize non-reactivity over being right or over speed. It changes how you make every decision. If your boss sends a frantic email at 9 p.m. and you value service, you answer it. If you value calm, you might not. This is why the top 3 constraint is so brutal but necessary. You can't value everything, because values often conflict with one another.
That's the hard truth, isn't it? You can't prioritize autonomy and connection at the exact same moment. One usually has to give way. So once we pick these 3, let's say I pick integrity, curiosity, and vitality, what do? Do I just post them on my mirror?
No, that's the aspirational trap again. The exercise requires a stress audit. This is the technical breakdown of the week. You look at your calendar for the last 7 days and find the moment you felt the most off balance. Not just busy, but wrong. Then you ask, which of my top 3 was being stepped on?
The text gives a great example of this. It says if you value connection but spent the whole day in isolated meetings, that is why you felt unstable. It's a diagnostic tool. It moves stress from being this vague gray cloud of I'm overwhelmed to a specific mechanical failure. I ignored my anchor.
And that specificity is empowering. If I know I'm stressed because I violated my value of curiosity by doing repetitive data entry for 10 hours, the solution isn't take a vacation. The solution is to inject a microdose of curiosity into my day. Maybe I listen to a complex podcast on the commute, or I ask a question in a meeting instead of just nodding.
I want to zoom out for a second, Eloise, because this talk of values feels very modern, almost like a byproduct of our secular, individualistic society. If we were having this conversation in 1500, we wouldn't be talking about my personal values. We'd be talking about virtue or religious duty. How did we get here?
That is a great historical point. You're right. If you go back to Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics, the goal was eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but it really means flourishing. For Aristotle, flourishing was objective. There were specific virtues, courage, temperance, justice, that you had to cultivate to be a good human. It wasn't a buffet where you picked 3.
Right, you couldn't just say, well, Aristotle, I'm really more of an autonomy guy, so I'm going to skip the justice part today.
Exactly. But as we moved through the Enlightenment and into the 20th century, and especially with the rise of existentialism, the script flipped. The external structures, church, rigid class systems, village life, started to dissolve. We gained freedom, which is great, but we lost the default script. We moved from character, doing what is right by the code, to personality and values, doing what is authentic to me.
So the burden of defining the good life shifted from the society to the individual.
And that is a heavy burden. That is why Mamuti's ship metaphor is so apt. In the past, the harbor was built for you. Now you are in the open ocean. If you don't drop your own anchor, you drift. We are suffering from decision fatigue because we have to reinvent our moral code every morning. The stabilizer is trying to automate that decision-making process.
I see. So if I know my value is vitality, I don't have to debate whether to eat the donut or the apple every time. The decision is already made by the anchor. It's a pre-commitment strategy.
Yes, this brings us to the final part of week 1, the micro-adjustment. Mamuti warns against grand gestures. He doesn't say, quit a job. He says, find one small action. If you value vitality, take a 10-minute walk. If you value wisdom, read 5 pages. Why do you think he insists on such small actions?
My guess?
because we're addicts for the grand overhaul. We love the idea of new year, new me. But big changes trigger the brain's fear response. A 10-minute walk flies under the radar. It proves to your subconscious that you are still in charge without triggering a panic attack.
It's about proof of life. You are proving to yourself that you are the captain of the ship, even if you only turn the wheel 1 degree. There is a concept in psychology called self-signaling. We infer who we are by watching what we do. If I see myself taking a walk every day, I start to believe I am a person who values vitality. The belief follows the action, not the other way around.
But there is a dark side to this too, isn't there? I mean, we see people who are so rigid about their values that they become insufferable. Or worse, they use values as a weapon. I value honesty, so I'm going to be cruel to you and call it truth-telling.
Oh, absolutely. That's the shadow side. Any value taken to the extreme becomes a vice. Aristotle taught us that too, the golden mean. Courage without caution is recklessness. Honesty without compassion is brutality. Mamuti's list includes wisdom, and I think that's the governing value. You need wisdom to know when to apply the anchor and when to let out a little slack.
And there is the corporate cynicism angle I have to bring up. I worked for a company once that had integrity carved into the marble lobby, and they were indicted for fraud 3 years later. I think that has made a lot of us allergic to this language. We hear core values and we think HR seminar.
That is moral injury in the workplace. When an authority figure claims a value but acts in direct opposition to it, it destroys trust faster than incompetence does. But notice that Mamuti isn't asking you to write a mission statement for your company. He's asking you to do this in the privacy of your own mind. This isn't for public consumption. It's for internal navigation. If you pick integrity, nobody else needs to know, but you will know when you lie.
The weekly mindset he prescribes is the value lens. Stop asking, how do I get everything done? And start asking, does this action reflect who I am? It shifts the metric of success from efficiency to alignment. It's a terrifying shift, honestly. Efficiency is easy to measure. I answered 50 emails. Good job, Noah. Alignment is messy.
It is messy, but efficiency without alignment is just running very fast in the wrong direction. That is the definition of the wobbly life Mamuti describes. You might be moving at high speed, but you feel nauseous because you aren't tethered.
Let's recap the homework for the listeners who want to actually try this week 1 protocol. Step 1, the selection. Pick 3, not 4, not 2, 3 values that feel like home. Step 2, the stress audit. Look at the last week, find the stress spike, and name the value you betrayed. Step 3, the micro adjustment. Do one small thing this week to honor that value.
And keep it small. If you value connection, send 1 text message. If you value calm, take 3 deep breaths before you start the car. You are rebuilding trust with yourself.
The text ends with an affirmation. I am not defined by the chaos around me. I am anchored by the values within me. Today, I choose to stand on solid ground. It's a strong statement. It implies that stability is a choice, not a circumstance.
It is the ultimate choice. The storm is always going to be there. The waves will always be high. The economy, the politics, the family drama, that is the weather. You cannot control the weather, but you can control the anchor. And that is what the stabilizer is offering.
We are going to be following this framework through the coming weeks, but for now, I'm going to go take a hard look at my list. I have a feeling comfort might be one of my operational values, and I'm not sure I want it to be.
That is the first step, Noah. Radical honesty about where the ship is actually docked.
Thanks, Eloise, and to everyone listening, check your anchor. We'll see you next week.